All right. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Shelly Lewis, and today is January 20th, 2019, and I'm back with our fire captains, John and Matt. And for those of you who have not heard the interviews on YouTube, please go to Supposedly Shelly for the first 3 interviews with John and Matt regarding the Paradise Fires. The purpose of today's show is to do a follow-up regarding the Paradise Fires, as well as answer any of your questions on YouTube. As you know from our last interview, we went into great detail of the anomalies of the twisted metal, smart meters, torched vehicles, unburned forests, unburned plastics where the houses were completely demolished, and carports where they look untouched, yet the vehicles underneath them are completely destroyed. We further discussed directed energy weapons, chemtrails, weather modification technology, as well as the role of smart meters involved in this fire. John and Matt also reviewed their findings in similar fires, such as the ones in Santa Rosa, the car fire, and the Mendocino complex. The purpose of today's interview is really an addendum to our last interview to tie up any loose ends, as well as additional findings relevant to the fire and similarities to other fires. We will address some of the questions you asked on YouTube, and then we'll have another some more of clarifications, as well as some additional information on the fire. So I want to thank you guys, John and Matt, for being here.
Thank you, Shelly.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us again, Shelly, and for setting up all this equipment and coming down up here in terrible weather.
No, I mean, you guys, I'm honored to be able to just get information out to our listeners. And
I want to thank all the people that have responded and so many positive comments. So it's clear that people are definitely waking up to what's going on. So
I mirror that as well. And the way I run with these is I try to get in and review the different comments and try to get feedback to people. So some of what we're going to clarify today we scooped up from comments and questions that people had.
That's great.
So,
John.
but I'd really like to thank everybody for following the work that we're doing.
Definitely, and people are really waking up to saying, hey, this could happen anywhere. And the fact that we're getting the word out there really gives people a voice to be able to stop this madness and alert other people of what's happening, for them to wake up.
Yeah.
it gives them a different set of eyes too, when they start seeing these fires and some of the devastation or whatever. They're going to be coming from a different angle now, having this information. So whereas they might not have, they'll see things a little different now.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Well, I want to just let you take it away with some of the questions.
Put me on the spot, just like that.
Let's take it away.
What I would like to say before I start is that this is an addendum, okay? It's points of clarification on the first 3 videos that we did. So it's probably not going to be tied together as well because it's based on the feedback and whatnot. So before watching this one, I would recommend to anybody that's interested in the subject matter we're going to be talking about to watch the first 3 videos that you did.
Right, and they can get that on Supposedly Shelly. That's on YouTube, SUPPOSEDLY, Shelly, SHELLY, as well as I think Brighteon is, no, not Brighteon, but what was the War Room? Kind of picked up a little bit of the...
Oh, on Alex Jones?
Alex Jones.
Infowars? Yeah.
He referenced you, and Greg Reese from Alex Jones put together a great video also, about a 5-minute video,
Right.
and he referenced the work that you've done with us with the other 3 videos.
But the other 3 really go into in-depth, it lays the foundation.
Yeah, and we're going to be referencing the comments based on those videos, so I agree with John. I think for anybody watching this, if you watch the other 3 videos first, it'll make a lot more sense.
Perfect. I love that. Okay, so...
and then the note on the pictures is that when Matt and I were doing forensic investigation up there, we went up there 3 different trips. We went up the 2nd, the 7th, and the 14th. So 3 different trips up there. And most of the pictures that Shelly has used in the previous tapes were taken by me, and they were actually evidence that we collected during our survey up in Paradise following the fires.
And one thing I will add right now that we negated to mention, that we should have mentioned, was 2 of our 3 trips up there, we were actually with Deborah Tavares and her husband Lou from StopTheCrime.net. And it was Deborah's husband Lou that actually found the cabinet with the melted smart meter. He's the one that actually opened it up and found it. So it was just an oversight on our part, but they were definitely with us 2 out of our 3 trips and a big part of our investigation. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Right.
So
StopTheCrime.net. Deborah Tavares has done extensive work
absolutely
on geoengineering.
And it was because of her work over the years of understanding the dangers of smart meters that I even had an awareness. She has probably done more than just about anybody of researching the dangers associated with smart meters. And so I just wanted to get that out there, because without having listened to her over the last couple of years about smart meters, I wouldn't have even been on my radar.
Huge shout out to Deborah Tavares. I mean, she's a real trailblazer, truther. She and her husband, I mean, countless hours of what they've dedicated to being truthful, being a truther out there, and we're so thankful for her. So thank you, Deborah and Lou. It's Lou, right?
Yes,
Tavares.
yes.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah and Lou.
Yeah.
Deborah knows more about the influence, the role of smart meters and what's going on than I know, and I'm pretty sure she knows even more than Matt knows.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So her research, she actually looks for source documents to back up what she's doing. So her work is outstanding.
One of the best interviewers I've ever met, and just incredible journalist, and just not afraid to get in there and ask questions. And she's got a tremendous way with compassion, and I just really can't say enough of great things about.
Yeah, they were with us. I mentioned the 3 days that we were up there, and they were with us on both the 2nd and on the 7th. So
excellent. Okay, thank you guys, and we'll put up a link on how you can listen to Deborah Tavares and follow her on YouTube. I think she has a website. I don't know what her YouTube channel is.
So she has actually several websites, and I won't know all of them, but one is StopTheCrime.net. Another one is primarywater.org.
Okay.
And she has another one that, I'll probably get it wrong, but it's something like Smart Meters Kill, something to that, or something that effect, or smart, I probably have it wrong, but I'm sure you can find it.
Right.
Because,
and if those pictures weren't something that just stopped everybody in their tracks, I mean, that melted smart meter in the steel case was like, wow, I got so many comments on that alone. That is just the smoking gun.
The smoking gun, that is one of the
reasons.
One of the causes for sure.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I like that you said that, Matt, because there were other things too that contributed to this. So we'll clarify that in the next hour. Or the next 20 minutes, however we get there.
yeah, however long it goes, however long it takes.
Yeah, great.
So did you want to start with some of the
Sure.
clarifications of comments?
Okay, so the way I'm going to break these down is that I'm going to go over some of the things that Matt and I have both reviewed. My list on this is some things that we felt needed clarification, and I watched each of the different first 3 sections of what we did, and then reviewed comments that people made. And again, thank you for everybody for all your well wishes and wishes regarding our safety and whatnot, and for all the positive feedback. So the first one I wrote down from session 1 is that we had talked about the melted glass phenomena, and I wanted to clarify a couple of points with that. In the automobiles, again, they were completely toasted, completely decimated, just burned out shells, just burned down to the body and the steel components. Matt and I, in our experience on a normal car fire, that there's not enough heat generated to cause the destruction to the windshields that we saw. So we had talked about the range of glass melting, 26, 27, 100 degrees, right around in there. And then the 3 of us went back and forth with it and bouncing those numbers around for clarification. And what I wanted to clarify is that I was able to find some evidence of glass totally melting, so it became molten, and that the glass in the cars that we showed in some of the pictures was literally at a pre-melting temperature, because the glass formed over what it fell across. So it was literally at a pre-melting temperature. And it's very, very unusual in a normal car fire to develop enough heat to cause the glass to perform like that. Do you want to add anything to it, Matt?
No, I totally agree. I agree with that.
So I want to clarify that point. So we're talking a vehicle fire that was at least in excess of probably, I don't know, over 2,000 some odd degrees to get it hot enough to be in that pre-melting phase. So that's the first one.
Okay. So we're saying that is usual with a car fire or unusual?
No, in a normal car fire, you would not see those types of temperatures.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So that and we were seeing that repeatedly. Again, these are not single anomalies. We were seeing them repeatedly.
Yes.
So that's the first one I wanted to. It was not quite molten, but it was damn close to it. So, and also on the evidence of the trees, this is an error that I made because I was on a different wavelength. When Matt and I were talking about the trees that we saw in Paradise, we saw hundreds of these trees that had the destruction at the base of the tree, at the trunk of the tree close to the ground. And I made a statement that we had looked at over 50 trees. What I meant by that was that how many I photographed. So, but we saw hundreds of examples, so it's very, very consistent finding where the destruction and the burning, the heat concentration of the trees was at the base close to the ground in the trunk.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, to me it seemed like the majority of what we saw was that type of burning, and like I said in previous videos, if you have a fire that is caused by some unnatural directed energy weapon that causes things to burn this certain way, it's obviously going to start a regular fire that's going to be along with it. So you're going to have both types of burning. But most of what we saw, most of what we saw was in the areas where it was obvious this is not the way things normally burn, was the hollowed out bases, totally burned, hollowed out, a lot of them creating a crater where you could actually follow the roots down. That was the norm in this places where, like, oh my God, this does not usually happen. How did this happen? So I just wanted to add
I agree.
that.
When I was in Concal with Jamie Lee from plaintruth.info, we saw the same thing. So it wasn't just isolated to certain parts of Paradise. It was like, I felt like it was throughout the entire area we were seeing this anomaly.
It was based on a very, very large geographical area, and the evidence just kept popping up just time and time again.
Yeah.
So that was a point of clarification. We're talking, I mean, obviously we couldn't cover every square foot of ground up there that had been involved in the fire, but we covered a rather extensive amount of different areas of the fire that had occurred, and we just kept seeing this destruction of the trees at the base consistently. So it's a consistent finding.
Yes.
So there's that. And then there was a really good comment in the first session about the role of nanoparticulates, of the role of geoengineering, of chemtrails, the slang. People don't like it when I use that word. It's like everything else. It's been weaponized because if this guy's calling them chemtrails, he's one of them conspiracy theorists. So everything gets flipped up on its head.
Well, and chemtrails, the downside of using the word chemtrails is it's actually not a scientific term. So they can look you in the eye and honestly say, no, we don't do chemtrails, we don't spray chemtrails, because they don't spray chemtrails. They spray barium, strontium, aluminum, because chemtrails is a slang term. So they do solar radiation, or
And that's how it's been weaponized. It's used to
Exactly.
discredit people who are accustomed to using that term.
Interesting.
So
thank you for clarifying that. It's such
Yeah.
a good thing to know.
So anyway, that being said, if we want to use the official terminology, we're talking geoengineering and
stratosphere, aerosol injection, solar radiation management. So those are the three of them.
Yeah, there's
there's
all
more.
these different programs that they're using to manipulate the environment. Remember, everybody, this stuff is going on all over the planet.
This is worldwide. This is absolutely worldwide.
Not confined to California or just the United States. People in Canada and Europe and Australia was getting pounded last week.
And all this can be looked up. These are all patented technologies, all of this. So if you're watching us for the first time, it may seem crazy what we're saying. Everything we're saying, it can all be looked up.
And can we just clarify, the nanoparticulates, what we had said previously was that they're highly combustible.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to morph into.
Perfect.
Okay, number one, the ones that we know about, the three main ingredients are aluminum oxide or nanoparticulate aluminum, barium, and strontium. So of those three metals, I don't know about the combustibility of barium and strontium, but I can tell you this, is that aluminum in nanoparticulate form is highly combustible. So in all of these fires that have been going on up here, we talked about the NorCal fire complex, including the Tubbs fire. Then we talked about the fires that happened here in July that burned down toward Lakeport like a freight train. And then we talked about the Carr fire, and then we talked about Paradise fire. And aside from that, we have all the ones that have been going on in Southern California. But one of the commonalities you're going to find with these, when you talk to witnesses and people who actually observe the geoengineering programs being sprayed in their skies, is that it seems like before the fire event that there's extra heavy spraying. Okay, and this was true with all the fires that I just mentioned. And
there's no way to know for sure what they're spraying. So we know over the years what they found the most of is the aluminum, barium, and strontium when they've done soil samples. So are they just spraying extra of that right before, or is there something else they're spraying?
It's like meat tenderizer or something.
Yeah, and like he's saying, these are desiccants. They actually take the humidity out of the air. They lower the fuel moisture, and these nanoparticles, they actually get into the circulatory system of the trees. So
the trees and the things that are growing.
Yes.
Wow, and Deborah Tavares, StopTheCrime.net, goes into really in-depth detail about that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. All right, great.
So Matt talked about the fact that they're, number one, they're a desiccant. They suck the moisture out of things, out of the atmosphere and out of the plant life. The other thing they do is when they're sprayed in the atmosphere is eventually they float down and they settle on things. So Shelly, you pointed this out in the previous videos we did where it was settling on the cars and whatnot, and lots of people were reporting on that. Well, these nanoparticulate metals would drift down, get into the branches and all the the leaves or the needles on the trees, and then eventually down to the ground. Also, they would settle on cars, rooftops, everything that's exposed to the atmosphere, these are going to settle on. So what we've been experiencing in California for the last several years is not only a dramatic increase in fires, but a very dramatic increase in the combustibility of stuff.
To me, that again, this is sort of recapping, but the Tubbs fire was the big awakening, I think, for me, for sure. I mean, we had some big other fires. I was out of town when the Valley Fire came through. That sounded pretty bad. But the Tubbs fire was cars flipped upside down and moved, and I-beams melted while the trees next to it seemed to be fine. So that was the first, for me, the first time it's like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And what the other thing we've seen over the last couple of years is fires, all the breaking records of the biggest, worst fire. The Santa Rosa, the Tubbs one was the worst one at the time. That was the worst one. And then the Carr fire, and now the Paradise fire. So they just keep getting worse and worse. And we're being told this is the new normal. Well, actually, they're saying Jerry Brown's saying it's the new abnormal. So
right, so get used to it, get prepared, guys, because it's going to keep getting worse.
That's what they're saying, and at the same time all this is going on. So back to other comments.
Yeah, there was a comment in the first session about reverse polarity, which I'm gonna punt on for now, because I want to get into this whole thing with grounding a little bit more and make a couple of clarifications there. So we'll put that off to the side here and hopefully get back to it. In the second part of the series, we went over a lot of the evidence, including the photographic evidence that we saw on the cars, the generator, the standalone generator that was off-grid that got completely burned up, the boats, and other things that were involved in fire where we couldn't explain how they burned. There wasn't enough fuel around them. They were in driveways or in clear areas.
Yep.
And so we went over that, and I wanted to revisit that whole topic because we showed a bunch of pictures, Shelly, where the tires were completely burned, and the only evidence, if it was a steel rim, the steel rim was still there, but draped over the top of the steel rim was the steel belting from the radials. And I did some additional thinking about that, and if we're suspecting some sort of a frequency that heated the metals up, it would also be heating up the steel belts in the radial tires.
Mm-hmm.
So it may help to explain the total destruction of the tires, and that was a consistent finding on every vehicle. So I wanted to point that out.
Right. I'm just going to reset this, guys.
As well as things that were connected to the metal, such as the wires going through fences and everything else. That's where the most burning was anything that was connected to the metal.
Right, and we saw that with those fence metal.
Absolutely.
It was like you could see the wood totally charred, and the metal was where you could see the line of the metal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That one picture I took of the address board, it was somebody had taken like a wood plank and put their address on it, with the metal letters.
The metal, it was all,
and it detached itself from the fence, it fell face down, all the combustible materials were all gone.
That's right.
And the numbers are there for it, and they're upside down, obviously, because it fell face down.
Right.
And all the fasteners, you could see all the different nails and everything, and everything combustible was gone.
Right, except for the metal. Brackets.
Yeah.
Or the nails.
Yeah. One point I really felt that was really, really super important to clarify is that I talked about the grounding in the first 3 tapes, and we didn't touch on this part, and that's that I described the grounding in the mobile homes, okay? How they have a single copper wire coming out of the panel, and it goes into a grounding rod that's driven into the ground, and it's fastened on there. And that's really the only way I could see where they were grounded. What I didn't explain, that houses are exactly the same way when you think about it, because a house, generally the buildup is off of a concrete stem wall foundation. So they have a similar issue with grounding, and that's that the panels are done in much the same way. They do them either one of two ways. Either the grounding wire is tied around the steel rebar in the concrete foundation prior to pouring it, so it's embedded in there. That's one way they do it, or they do it to a grounding rod. It sort of depends on the vintage of construction and how they do it at the time. But they're not very well grounded. They have the same single copper wire that goes down to a grounding system. So I wanted to clarify that. There was a couple of comments on the tires, the steel belted radials, and also I think that's about it for section 2.
I got a comment on one of the, I'm not sure what section it was in, but one person commented that it seems like they're fine-tuning their frequencies, and I would have to concur.
I would have to agree with that as well.
And I think what they're getting at is when you look at the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, you look at the Carr fire in Redding, you had vehicles that were moved a long ways, flipped upside down, found houses burned down to the foundation with nothing left, nothing at all. And on this fire, even though it was nothing like anything that we had seen during our career, at least we had shells that were left of the appliances, and it looked like they were getting better at disguising, making it look more natural.
What Matt's alluding to is that in the Tubbs fire, as tragic as all that stuff was, is that they overdid it a little bit on the frequency. So they might have gone, well, we got to fine tune that a little bit because they're catching on to us. If you look at a lot of these things that go on, generally the people, the actual hardcore researchers, can generally debunk most of the government narratives within about 2 days. That's my experience. It takes us 48 hours or less to start completely shredding the narrative. And so the Tubbs fire took a little bit longer because it just went, it was slow for the information to come out. But the total destruction inside of those foundations of appliances and everything else that was in there.
Countertops,
Matt and I have never seen anything like that in our career.
Well, they just don't get hot enough to do that. It takes so much heat to be able to get rid of everything down to, the appliance, an oven gone, a toilet gone. I mean, that's what was gone in Santa Rosa, the Tubbs fire. The toilets were gone. Where's the toilet?
I forget what the melting temperature for porcelain is. I think it's over 3,000 degrees.
Wow.
So this one, they did a better job of not doing that. So, but it was still obvious to us with the discrepancy, of the vegetation that was there, the dry pine needles and grass that was there next to total, pretty much total destruction of, vehicles and structures. So.
Not quite as dramatic as the Tubbs fire, but similarities.
Not quite as, but the vegetation wasn't burned as much here either, I think. So, although it wasn't, I'd say it was less on the vegetation here, but there was still not burned like it should have been there either. So.
Interesting.
And then one other thing I have written down here just as a note, Matt and I talked about this before we got started, is that Matt kept referring to witnesses in the first 3 tapes, and a lot of those witnesses that he's referring to were residents. They were residents that lived in the area. So if you take an account I saw the staging area set up at the golf course off of Skyway 2 weeks before the fire. That is from a reliable witness, which is a resident of the area.
And And so now, I mean, we'll get on to things that have happened since our last interview, things that we found, and I'll have to say.
In a second, we got to go through.
Oh, you got more?
We got one
More
more.
questions?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
One more page to go through.
Perfect.
Okay, so what Matt was just talking about, we're going to really try to hammer down and tie our evidence to our conclusions as we kind of move into that next phase. There was a comment in the third session about trees being full of water that you made, Shelly, and keeping in mind that the geoengineering programs are a desiccant to the forest, is that generally the way I would expect to find those fuels up there in the forest, knowing what I know about geoengineering, is I would expect to find them on the drier side already because of the geoengineering programs and the spraying. So there's not a magic reservoir in trees where they're full of water. What we generally look at is the fuel moisture content.
Yeah.
So, and trees are considered 100-hour fuels. So, for a tree to react to lower humidity takes 100 hours of exposure to that lower humidity for the tree to draw down and to match that humidity. And the smaller, lighter fuels are much more responsive to low humidity. But I would expect that even as much as a day prior to the fires up there, that I would expect to find those trees that were involved in the fire up there desiccated and low moisture content. You in agreement with that,
Absolutely,
Matt?
absolutely.
Okay. So I want to kind of reinforce that. Which begs the question, if they're actually in that state, how come the forest didn't burn worse?
Well, and that's the question.
That's one thing to call it a forest fire and then to see cars completely demolished, glass
And that's been
melted.
and then my whole thing all along is the conditions were not epic for a forest fire. That's my conclusion, is the conditions weren't epic for the forest to burn. Otherwise the canopies would have been burned. There was an external factor that was
Some kind of an external factor.
that was decimating the structures, while the forest appeared to be more of an exposure.
Because I'm not in disagreement with what Matt's saying, but my point with it is that with the geoengineering programs going on, I would have expected the trees in the forest up there to be dry on the drier side and on the low humidity side, and to react much worse in the fires than they did.
Right, to say that there's so much water in these trees, I mean, we've been told for the last few years that we're not watering our grasses anymore. These trees are, they should have just gone up like a cracker box, but that's just my opinion. I'm not an expert by any means, but to me, we'll say the full of water, it just did not make sense. And don't the roots typically have the most water? Right.
Typically,
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and so we saw these roots completely
Yeah. The
burned
roots.
up,
The
so
roots.
that-
The roots burn much better than the exposed above ground where the heat source was. The ones that are protected under the ground burn the most.
Right.
Where they don't have good access to
Yeah.
oxygen and
I mean,
all
so,
that stuff.
Yeah, it's not natural.
Okay, so this next one is, I'm gonna let Matt start with it, because I wanted to make a clarification on the winds, because we were kind of doing this three-way thing,
Oh, yeah.
and it kind of got lost.
Yeah.
Our different points got lost.
Yeah.
And so Matt's going to start off talking about how a wildfire creates its own weather system, and when it does that, when we generally see that.
Right. So, yeah, there was a little confusion last time, and there was discrepancy of when the wind, were there winds, were there not winds. So, for a fires will, when they get raging, they will create their own winds, but they have to be established and be really going cooking really hot. And what that does is it gets, when you have a fire, it creates a convective column that goes up. And so that has to draw all the air from horizontally in that way. And so you get this convective current. And with that, that's how you get these winds. But it takes a long time, and they'll start creating their own weather too. I mean, so, but that's well into the fire. And so if people were talking about winds, I think I confused the issue when John was talking about winds, and I said, well, they can create their own winds. Well, he was talking about some heavy winds at the beginning of the fire, and absolutely fires at the very beginning, at the incipient stages, they don't create their own wind. So for a fire to create its own wind, it's after it is really raging. That's when it'll start creating its own winds and create its own fire behavior. So did that answer?
Yes, absolutely. So the point with it is that early on in the fire in Paradise and other fires that have occurred here, and also I've heard reports of it in some of the Southern California fires where people experience these high, erratic, rather unexplainable winds at the onset of the fire. And so the question would be is what's causing those winds, because the fire has not developed enough to create its own weather, because we're talking at the start of these fires. And my point is that these high erratic winds that have been reported on a consistent basis seem to accompany this theoretical use of directed energy weapons at the beginning of the fire. Those have been reported consistently through multiple fires. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that, because it got a little bit muddled.
And it's definitely not caused by the fire. So that sort of was a separation there.
Right.
What he's talking about. Same thing happened at the Tubbs fire. At the very beginning, when fires were happening, the winds were crazy.
My sister got to experience it firsthand. Her and her boyfriend were up here, and the night that the fire started, they drove out here about 5:30 in the afternoon and drove down through Napa Valley. And those winds were there already. She would literally report that they were getting blown all over the road, driving down through Napa Valley.
And for clarification, how do those winds get so crazy?
Well, there's the question.
That's
and
the $64,000 question.
Back to when you start learning about all the different tools at the disposal of whoever is doing this, creating weather, modifying the weather, managing the weather. They're out there. They're able to create high pressure zones and low pressure zones, move the jet stream, and all this is documented that can be looked up. So that seems to happen every time.
Our weather modification.
NextRad, yes, all of this.
Right.
Yes. So.
Great. So the point being is that there were winds prior to the actual fire starting, and then once a fire actually gets going, a fire will create its own wind source as well. So we're just clarifying those two distinct points. Great.
So that's about it for clarification items that I had. Do you have anything else to add to that, Matt?
No, I don't think for clarification. I think you've done a pretty good job.
Thanks so much for listening to Down the Rabbit Hole with Shelly Lewis. Stay tuned for the next hour. We're coming back with John and Matt regarding more of the Paradise Fire. You're listening to FERlive.com, The Ferret. Tune in for next hour. We'll see you soon.